It is such an honor to be with you today. Seeking therapy is not about being crazy or in crisis. I believe we all need it at different points in our lives. I love being a therapist. It's such a deep and profound honor to help people heal and grow and develop and live a greater life, both personally and professionally. And as I've worked on myself, whether it's in therapy or through meditation or yoga practices, I've noticed that my life has started to expand. Never ever, as that girl that was afraid to talk in class, would I imagine that I'd be speaking to you today, or that I would have been the therapist on the Real World on MTV doing group therapy in the house with the roommates. And I've put together this presentation for you called The Psychology of Success, and it's really principles that I think we can all apply to our lives to live a greater life. I always like to think that we are both the author and the protagonist of our own life story. So we can write the middle and we can write the ending. So I believe in life we're all dealt a different hand of hardships and blessings, and that success is about how we play that hand. We want to become conscious of why we do what we do. And we want to give ourselves permission to let go of any self-defeating patterns. Because again, we all repeat what's familiar to us. I had a client who was married to an alcoholic, and unfortunately, he was unwilling to get help. He was very, very ill. He was kind of the investment banker, strip club goer kind of alcoholic, and she made the brave decision of leaving him. She had been out of the workforce for 10 years, had 3 small children, and was very worried about how she would provide for herself. But like the phoenix rising from the ashes, she tapped into her strength and she blossomed. And a year later, she was earning 6 figures, bought a house, and never looked better. And then she called me a little bit later and she said, "Hey, Joyce, you know what? I need a tune-up. I started dating, and my new boyfriend is just like my ex-husband, except he's got an Australian accent." So we want to be aware of the patterns that we're repeating and give ourselves permission to change. I love this quote from Wayne Dyer. He said, "Everything you do is based on the choices you make. It's not your parents, your past relationship, your job, the economy, the weather, an argument, or your age that is to blame. You and only you are responsible for every decision and choice you make." I was telling my older sister, Paula, that I love Wayne Dyer and his work. And she said, "You know, I think he was my driver's ed teacher." And I said, "No, he was a world-renowned philosopher, an author, and speaker, and he was not your driver's ed teacher." So I Googled him to prove her wrong, and he was her driver's ed teacher. It was his first job out of graduate school. He was the school counselor at her high school, and he taught the driver's ed program. Well, I went on to read about him, and I learned more. I learned that his father had abandoned he and his 2 siblings and his mother when he was young, and that his mother was unable to care for them. And he grew up in multiple orphanages and foster homes. So he was dealt a difficult hand, yet he says we need to take responsibility. I love mindfulness practices because they bring your attention to the present moment. Across hundreds of cultures and thousands of years, people say the breath is what ties together the mind, the body, and the spirit. So when we focus on our breath and we deepen it and we slow it, we can relax our minds and we can calm our bodies and we can bring our awareness to the present moment. I was working with a client of mine who is a businessman who was dealing with lots of anxiety, ruminating thoughts and worries, and he was having difficulty sleeping. And I talked to him about mindfulness and the importance of staying in the present moment. And then he canceled his next session, and I didn't see him for 6 weeks. I was kind of concerned. And then he came back and he said, "Joyce, it was that last session that got me through the last month and a half." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I left your office and I went to my doctor's and I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer." And he said, "My mind immediately went to catastrophic thinking of the worst case scenario, of my mortality, of my wife and small children, my business, my family. And I remembered your words. And I thought, I'm not going to take this one day at a time. I'm going to take it 1 minute at a time. And he said, I realized that in the present moment, I was feeling pretty good. And so when I laid in the MRI machine, I thought, I'm okay right now. And this Madonna music that's playing in the hospital isn't half bad. And he just took it step by step. I'm so happy to share with you that 4 years later, his health is great and he's in remission. But he left me with the most beautiful analogy for mindfulness and staying in the present moment. He said, Joyce, I realize that it's as if in life we're each given a record album. And when we're born, the needle sets on the record and the record begins to play. And if we worry about the past, if we second guess, or we worry about the future, then we scratch up our record and there is no music. He said the present moment is where we can hear our song. Many of us are constrained by the powers of FUD. FUD is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Ask yourself, what would I do if I weren't afraid? I saw my friend Randy at a holiday party, and he said, hey, Joyce, how's your book coming along? And I said, not so good, admittedly. I'm really stuck with it. And he said, oh, man, you've got to see my monk. And I said, your monk? And he said, yeah, my Buddhist monk. I think you should talk to him. And I thought, you know what, I'll take any help I can get. I'll make an appointment with your monk. So I did. It was not what I expected. He was not the Tibetan-looking monk that I was expecting. He was a Jewish man in Highland Park wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, and he'd just retired from his big job at Accenture and to focus on his practice. And when I first was speaking with him, he was talking about his thoughts on where science meets spirituality. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is one of the smartest people I've ever talked with. He has the highest intellect, maybe of anyone I've ever met. So I started telling him my story and about my book and my struggles. And he was listening. And then he said, I have your answer. And I said, you do? And he took out a little white piece of paper and he wrote something down and he handed it to me. And I was so excited to get the answer to all of my problems. And I read it. And I said, are you being serious? Are you kidding me? What do you mean? And he said, weaken the fiction. Weaken the fiction that you're telling yourself in your head, and you will be free. We all have egos. It's part of the human condition. Our egos are our mind, and it's who we think we are sometimes. It's our identity, the mask that we wear to the world around us. But really, we are our essence. And our essence is the deeper entity that lies within. Some people might say that's your true self, your authentic self, or even your soul. And by detaching from ego and operating from a place of essence, that's where you can find true confidence. And true confidence is not competitive. It's where you celebrate yourself and you celebrate others, and you shine your light, and you're vulnerable, and you're authentic, and you're real. So it's super important to practice that. I do think that the power of meditation can help with that, with tapping into that deeper part of you. And then also the power of mantra, saying things in a moment of reflection like, I am love and I am light. I think the Native American tale tells it best. A Cherokee grandfather was speaking with his grandson, and he said, inside me there is a battle between two wolves. One wolf is evil, and he represents anger and greed and jealousy and superiority, inferiority, and ego. And the other wolf is good and represents joy and serenity and love and peace and humility and faith. And he said, and this battle is going on inside of you and inside of every person. And the boy thought about it for a minute, and he said, well, which wolf will win? And the grandfather said, the one that you feed. I think boundaries are super important for us as women. We all have boundaries, whether they're emotional boundaries, relational boundaries, financial boundaries, sexual boundaries. And in order to take care of ourselves, we need to set boundaries that are firm enough so that we feel safe and comfortable, and permeable enough that we're allowing intimacy and connection into our life. I always say that healthy self-esteem is midway between diva and doormat. So the diva is very entitled and not respectful of other people's boundaries. And the doormat does not have good confidence and is not respectful of her own. Well, healthy self-esteem is where you recognize that you have your strengths and you also have your stuff that you're working on, and you respect yourself and you respect other people, and you communicate with assertiveness. Assertiveness is that happy medium between aggressiveness and passiveness. Assertiveness is where you're honest and direct and clear in setting your boundaries. And that's super important for work-life balance as women as well. Prosperity is more than just money. Prosperity is any kind of resources that you want to welcome into your life. It might be support, it might be opportunities, it might be friendship, and it can also be money. I have become really fascinated with the psychology of money, and this started because I noticed early on in my practice that as my clients were in therapy, they started to get promoted. They started to get salary increases across the board. It didn't matter if they were coming in for an eating disorder or anxiety or depression or addiction. And I thought, why is this happening? Well, it's because we're always working on underlying self-esteem issues. And as their self-esteem improved, they started to earn more money. I also noticed that people learn their belief systems about money from their families of origin. So maybe you grew up in a family that didn't have much, that kind of believed in the scarcity model of kind of being protective of what you have or having fear or anxiety about money. Maybe you had, I know in my family, my dad lost his job and was unemployed for a significant part of my childhood, which was stressful, and that created some belief systems about money for me. And that influences how you behave with money. So I encourage you to think about, what does money mean to you? I think there's a direct tie between self-esteem and money. When I first started my practice in 1996, I met for coffee with my friend Steve, who was also starting a practice. And he said, hey, how much money do you want to make? And I said, well, I really need to make $60,000 a year. That would be really great. And he said, 60? I want to make 100. And I said, $100,000? Do you think that that's possible? And he said, of course it's possible. And that year, I made 60, and Steve made 100. And I thought, am I setting my own ceiling with self-limiting beliefs? So I've worked at expanding my thinking. And today, I never would have imagined. I actually recently sold Urban Balance. I'm still staying on as founder and still see clients there, but I sold it for more than I would have ever imagined having in my life, because I changed that $60,000 a year thinking. And by the way, Steve also started another business. He started Talbot's Teas, which was on Oprah's Favorite Things, and he won Shark Tank and sold his business to Jamba Juice. So it does help when you start thinking about your relationship with money. My first time I was invited to public speak out of state, I had no idea what to charge. So I asked my friend Ross, and he gave me a dollar amount. And I went back to the people who were interested in hiring me. I gave that amount. They said, sure, no problem. And I was so excited. And I went back to Ross and I said, I can't believe I'm getting that amount of money for 45 minutes. And he said, 45 minutes? I gave you my day rate. As Dr. Phil would say, the most you get is what you ask for. Practicing gratitude is a way to attract positivity into your life. So when you have a bad day, when you're dealing with a problem, try to look at the good parts. I'm super grateful for a boss that I had that wouldn't promote me. Because if I never had her, I might have never started my own business. So sometimes things that look like hardships are actually blessings in your life. And if you can train yourself to look at it that way, you'll have more positivity. I had a client who was in therapy for a lot of different problems she was having with her career, with her marriage, in her friendships, and she decided to take a break, and she decided to do some service work in Haiti. And when she came back, she sat on my couch and she said, I have no problems. Because being of service to others made her realize how much she has and all the blessings in her life. So shifting her thinking from her problems to everything that she has that's going really well. And we all have the power to do that. So today I have shared with you many quotes from many thought leaders who I admire. And I'd like to leave you today with a quote of my own. And it's a quote about what I believe success is. Success is to live openly, authentically, and lovingly in alignment with the highest good of self and others, and to the greatest extent possible. I really wish this for all of you. May your minds be conscious, your hearts open, and your spirits dance with joy.